For Krima Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. Political analyst Aubrey Majiki joins me to discuss the KPMG scandal. What do you mean by saying that the KPMG scandal is just the tip of the iceberg?
Well, when the KPMG story broke, I was not surprised at all, because for many years now, there have been rumors about what happens when accounting meets politics, or when accounting meets profit. And the rumors have been about how the clients of some of these accounting and auditing firms would demand of the firms to basically cook the books, to give them the audit outcomes they want in return for more work, sometimes in return for a higher fee. So this is a rumor that has been with us for decades, actually, not even for several years. And therefore, if there must be an investigation, it must be an investigation that is industry-wide, not an investigation that is limited to KPMG, because we do need to find out the extent to which policy and other outcomes have been distorted by the problematic interface between accounting and profit and between accounting and politics.
You say you are happy that members of Parliament's Standing Committee on Public Accounts are not as gullible as some sections of the media. Why?
Well, what has happened is that the decision by KPMG to withdraw its findings and conclusions, and of course, without withdrawing the body of the report itself, has been interpreted by some as evidence of a political campaign against people such as Pravin Gordhan, the former finance minister, and therefore evidence that the so-called rogue unit did not exist. It was an invention. And to give it credibility, KPMG was enjoined to give SARS the conclusions and findings that effectively SARS had dictated to KPMG. When the story broke, I thought the truth firstly needs to be investigated, because the truth, in my view, is much more complicated than that. The truth is not only about KPMG withdrawing its findings and conclusions after finding that those conclusions were unfair to certain individuals. Now, what we saw in Scopa is Scopa exposing the fact that KPMG, at least those it had sent to Parliament, were not even sure which of the recommendations and findings could be relied upon and which could not be relied upon. You even had situations where you will have a finding in the body of the report, not withdrawn, but withdrawn in the findings and conclusions, which means the circumstances under which KPMG withdrew the findings and conclusions itself or themselves must be investigated, because it cannot be that it is a straightforward matter of KPMG withdrawing these conclusions and findings because they were disadvantageous to certain people.
You also talk of embedded journalists who come in two different flavors. How are they influencing the scandal?
Well, we have two types. We have more. But for the purposes of this interview, we have two types. You have those who are genuinely gullible and genuinely naive and are susceptible to single narratives, especially when those single narratives coincide with their pre-existing view of the world or of political reality. We have the second kind that is not naive at all, that is not gullible at all, but pretends to be gullible and naive because it is embedded either intellectually or politically or both, or even worse, embedded in other ways. Now, that kind of journalist has become a conduit for the imposition of single narratives about political reality, ignoring complexity, ignoring that more often than not, there is more than one explanation for a political phenomenon or a political event, such as the KPMG scandal. And therefore, they've become a conduit for the imposition of narratives that exonerate those they are embedded with.
Can you briefly explain why you say the truth is more complicated and probably consists of the two versions of reality and much more?
Well, the point I'm making there is that, as I've indicated, there are journalists who are genuinely naive and gullible. And then there are journalists who feign gullibility and naivety. The latter is very dangerous, because that journalist has become part of systems of propaganda. Because what our politics has become susceptible to are systems of propaganda, with each side in the battle trying to impose its narrative on our political discourse. And unfortunately, some of our journalists have become part of those systems of propaganda.
As a political analyst, Aubrey, do you think newly appointed KPMG CEO Nhlamu Dlomu is up to the challenge?
I don't know. But it smacks of the old thing of window dressing. You have a company, KPMG may or may not be an example of such a company, whose culture is dominantly white, whose culture is alienating to those who are black within it. Companies where even black executives have little or no decision-making power. And their main job basically is to go and talk to your people. It's quite possible, it may not be the case, but it is possible, that the newly appointed CEO plays this role of going to talk to your people and to give KPMG a face it might not have had before the scandal, but a convenient face, because the complexion of that face is the same as the complexion of the people asking questions in Parliament.
Why do you share the same sentiments with economist Iraj Abidjan, who has been arguing that it is not possible to get away with what the Guptas are allegedly getting away with without the help of lawyers, accountants, and even bankers?
I do agree with Iraj Abidjan. Firstly, that things are more complex than meet the eye. And I have always suspected two things: that the Guptas are a problem, yes, but at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to things such as state capture. Secondly, I have always accepted that entities such as the Guptas would not be able to get away with what is being alleged against them without the help of rogue lawyers, rogue accountant and auditors, and rogue elements within our banks. And therefore, I agree with him that these investigations must extend to the possible involvement of rogue elements in banks, rogue elements in accounting and auditing firms, and rogue elements in legal firms.
And lastly, Patrick Dale, labor law expert from Dale Attorneys, says the severance packages that KPMG paid to its executives were simply golden handshakes. Do you think they will ever account?
I don't think there's anything golden about them, actually. KPMG, a scoper, was asking when they appeared in front of the committee, must answer many questions. But in relation to your question, they must answer two. Firstly, why is it that they withdraw their report partially, but want to refund SARS in full? What are they paying for? What are they buying? Secondly, why is it that they facilitated the exit of the 7 or 8 executives with such indecent haste and are willing to pay them these large sums with such alacrity? There too, what are they buying? Those are the two questions they must answer.
That was political analyst Aubrey Majiqi speaking to Krima Media's Polity about the KPMG scandal.